He sat at the corner table, unnoticed, quietly eating his meal. The cafeteria buzzed around him, but no one stopped to say hello. No one asked his name. Just another face to pass by in the blur of daily routine. But that day, something changed. A young soldier spotted the faded patch on his jacket, a symbol only a few ever earn. And the room shifted. Because sometimes the loudest battles are fought in silence, and the quietest veterans carry the heaviest stories. Welcome to the Unspoken chapter. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, hit subscribe and join us. This is the story of a man who never asked for thanks but commanded respect. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't searching for an audience. He just wanted a meal, a moment of quiet in a world that moved too fast. The veteran sat alone, the scars on his hands telling a story that words never could. Years of service carved into the lines of his face, each wrinkle a chapter written in hardship and sacrifice. His jacket was old, worn at the seams, but the patch sewn above his heart was unmistakable, the emblem of a special forces unit, faded but proud. Most people didn't notice it. Those who did looked away quickly, unsure if they should acknowledge what it meant. The cafeteria was filled with young soldiers, fresh from training, their faces eager and full of questions. They talked loudly, joked without filter, and moved with restless energy. To them, this man was just background noise. Another old-timer, a relic of battles they could barely imagine. But one young recruit, a kid named Ellis, was different. He'd been watching the veteran all morning, noticing the quiet dignity in his posture, the way his eyes scanned the room, not with suspicion, but with a calm that seemed to weigh the very air. When Ellis caught sight of the patch, something clicked. He remembered stories he'd heard, tales from instructors about men who'd walked through hell and come back silent but unbroken. Ellis wanted to speak, to ask the man about those stories, but he hesitated. How do you approach a legend without seeming foolish? Instead, he simply nodded in respect, and the veteran returned the gesture, subtle but unmistakable. It was that small moment that changed everything. By noon, the atmosphere in the cafeteria had shifted. The younger soldiers stopped their boisterous chatter, casting curious glances toward the corner where the veteran sat. Word spread quietly, a whisper here and there about the man who had been there all morning. The man they barely noticed, but should have. No one approached him yet. No one dared to break the silence of respect, growing like a slow tide. It was as if the room itself understood that this wasn't an ordinary man, that beneath the quiet exterior was a story worth listening to. A few instructors who had just come in paused by the entrance, their eyes locking briefly on the veteran. They exchanged looks, an unspoken agreement to let things unfold naturally. This was not about fanfare or ceremony. It was about honor, something deeper than words. The veteran, whose name was Jack, had lived a life many couldn't fathom. He'd enlisted straight out of high school, driven by a sense of duty that went beyond patriotism. His time in the military spanned decades, from jungles thick with danger to deserts scorched by relentless sun. He saw friends fall, missions go sideways, and the weight of command settle heavy on his shoulders. Yet Jack never spoke of these things. Not to his family, not to strangers, not even to the soldiers who now sought to know him. His silence was a shield and a burden, a choice to carry the past without asking for pity or praise. He remembered one mission vividly, the kind that left a mark on a man's soul forever. It was a rescue operation deep behind enemy lines, where communication was cut off and hope was thin. Jack and his team had moved through the shadows, risking everything for comrades trapped in a nightmare of gunfire and chaos. They fought with everything they had. They lost more than they saved. When the dust settled, Jack had been the last to leave, carrying a wounded teammate on his back for miles through hostile territory. The memory of that day was etched in his bones, but he never spoke of it. It was a story for the men who lived it, a bond unspoken and eternal. Back in the cafeteria, Ellis finally gathered the courage to approach. He sat across from Jack, not quite sure how to begin. The veteran looked up, eyes meeting his without surprise or judgment. "Mind if I sit?" Ellis asked. Jack nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through the years of weariness. "I've heard stories," Ellis said quietly, "about guys like you, about what you've done." Jack's smile faded into something more solemn. "Stories often don't capture the truth," he said. "They only show what people want to see." "But those stories mean something," Ellis insisted. "To me, to all of us. They teach us what it means to be strong." Jack looked out the window for a moment, then back at Ellis. "Strength isn't always loud," he said. "Sometimes it's the quiet resolve to keep going when no one is watching, to carry the weight without complaint." That moment sealed something between them. A passing of a torch, not in words, but in understanding. Word of their conversation spread slowly but surely throughout the base. At first, it was just whispers among small groups of soldiers during breaks or while waiting for drills to begin. Those who had once barely noticed Jack now found themselves drawn to him, not because of any grand reputation, but because of the quiet presence he carried with him, like a steady flame in the dark. Jack didn't command attention through loud speeches or commanding orders. Instead, he shared moments of quiet wisdom, small lessons shaped by decades spent in the shadows of conflict. His words were not proclamations, but gentle nudges, teaching without preaching, guiding without demanding. He taught them that courage wasn't just the moments of heroism under fire, but the choice to rise every morning, to face whatever trials the day might bring with steady resolve. That true loyalty wasn't about recognition or accolades, but about standing with each other when no one else was watching, bearing the weight of memories not as burdens, but as a driving purpose. Jack's lessons weren't recorded in manuals or training guides, but in the silent respect he earned from those who listened and learned. Slowly, Jack became more than just a veteran passing through the halls. He became a symbol, a living testament to what it meant to serve without expectation or ego. He didn't seek the spotlight, nor did he want medals or parades. What he wanted, in the simplest terms, was for the next generation of soldiers to remember that their fight was part of a much larger story, one built on sacrifice, honor, and unspoken bonds. One afternoon, as Jack was leaving the cafeteria, a group of younger soldiers gathered around him. They formed a quiet circle, their eyes filled with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and a hint of nervousness. None of them spoke at first, hesitant to break the silence that seemed to hang between them like sacred air. Finally, a voice broke through. "Sir," a young soldier said, stepping forward, "would you share a story with us? Something we can learn from. Something real." Jack looked at each face in the group, taking in the eagerness and uncertainty mixed with reverence. He nodded slowly and began to speak, not of battles or medals, but of the men he had served with. He told stories of their laughter amid hardship, of their fears and doubts that none saw, and of the rare moments of humanity that shone through the darkest chaos. He spoke of resilience, not just the physical kind, but the kind of inner strength that allows a person to keep moving forward when all hope seems lost. He spoke of brotherhood, not just in the bonds forged in battle, but in the quiet loyalty that extends long after the guns fall silent. And he spoke of sacrifice, not only on the battlefield, but in the everyday choices to live with honor, to carry the memories of those lost, and to live as a reflection of their courage. As Jack spoke, the soldiers didn't just hear his words, they felt the weight behind them. His stories weren't grand or embellished. They were raw, honest, and deeply human. In that small circle, a connection was forged, a silent promise to carry forward the lessons of those who had come before. That night, Ellis sat alone in his room, staring at the patch on his own jacket. He thought about Jack, about the stories left untold, and the heavy silence that carried them. He realized that the greatest honor wasn't in public recognition or fame. It was in the unspoken bonds forged through hardship, in the quiet presence of those who had walked through fire and come back still standing. Ellis made a promise to himself then, to carry that legacy forward, not just with words, but through his actions, to live in a way that honored the sacrifices of those who had come before, even when no one was watching. Days turned into weeks, and Jack continued to move through the base like a shadow with purpose. His story wasn't broadcast on loudspeakers or splashed across notice boards, but it was known, felt, respected. The soldiers who crossed his path found themselves inspired to push harder, stand taller, and live up to a standard set quietly by a man who never asked to be noticed. Jack never changed his routine. He still ate alone at the same corner table, still kept his distance, and carried his past like a quiet weight on his shoulders. But now, the cafeteria was never quite the same when he entered. The hum of voices softened, laughter turned to nods of respect, and the room held a space for him. A silent acknowledgement that some stories don't need to be shouted to be heard. One early morning, as the sun crept slowly over the horizon, Jack stood outside the base gate. He watched as new recruits streamed in, full of hope and fear, ready to begin their own chapters. In his hand, he held a worn photograph, a snapshot of a younger version of himself, flanked by brothers who never came home. He touched the edges gently, the weight of memories flooding back, then folded it carefully and slipped it back into his jacket pocket. Because some stories aren't just told, they're carried, passed quietly, solemnly, from one generation to the next. In the weeks that followed, a small plaque appeared in the cafeteria, placed without fanfare or announcement. Just a simple dedication to those who serve silently, whose sacrifices echo beyond words. Soldiers paused before it, some whispering thanks, others simply nodding in solemn respect. And somewhere, far from the noise and recognition, Jack smiled softly, knowing the unspoken chapter was still being written, carried forward quietly by those who understood its true meaning. Have you ever met someone like Jack? Someone who carried a lifetime of courage quietly, without asking for praise or recognition? Share their story in the comments. Let's honor those who serve in silence, whose legacy lives on in the hearts of those who remember. Because here on the Unspoken chapter, we believe every story deserves to be told, even the ones whispered in silence. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and join us as we uncover the hidden tales of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Until next time, remember to look closer, because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones you never see coming.